If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
It's crazy how things just kind of pop into your head. I was watching the Penn State game, which I have on pause right now, before we hopped on here, and I was thinking about my 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Kirchie. I don't know if I've mentioned him before, but there's certain things that people say in your life that just kind of stick in your brain. He had a poster above his blackboard that just basically said, God must be a Penn State fan because why else would he make the sky blue and white? But for this episode here, the other thing he said stuck in my head more than anything is never assume anything. And it sticks with me just because with the Pirates, I feel like that we make a lot of assumptions as to what's going to happen, what they're going to do with certain players, how certain players are going to perform. And we're going to talk about all this. But first off, Scott, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. I, too, have the Penn State game on pause as an alum. This is a very exciting situation for me. I've never in my life experienced Penn State having this kind of run. But we're here to talk baseball, so I will try to take my Penn State hat off and temporarily get back into Bucco mode. Big day with some moves. We actually have some news to talk about today.
Yeah, we don't have to kind of make up topics this time, even though I'm going to go with some of the made-up topics that we had previously discussed. We knew the arbitration news was going to be coming out. Wasn't sure how much of that was going to leak. I knew there was like a soft deadline during the middle of the day, but as we know with the Pirates, a lot of their moves, their decisions, whether it be tendering players, Rule 5 protections, they have waited till the last minute or past the last minute to kind of do those. So we prepped some stuff beforehand, and I was leading with the assumptions. And the one big thing with me that I was thinking about before this was before last season, we assumed that the starting staff needed a few more people in there. You added in a Martin Perez. You added in a Marco Gonzalez. And then there was also that little bit of assumption out there that the bullpen, who was listed as, I believe, on some ranking that got put out a couple days before the season started, as the 4th best bullpen in baseball, obviously on paper, did not turn out to be that way, ended up in the bottom 4 of bullpens. But I was also thinking about the assumption that as it stands right now, Johan Oviedo on roster resources, on Fangraphs, Jason Martinez have had him on the show before. They have Johan Oviedo listed as basically the 4 or 5 starter. And everybody talks about and, highlights the obvious. The Joshua Palacios is listed as the right fielder, on that same site at the moment. That's not going to happen. I mean, Jason is putting in there who is on the roster, who is most likely a guy who is finishing at the major leagues, not somebody like Jack Sawinski, who we talked about the past couple of weeks, who finished his year in the minors, spent a majority of the year, in the minors. But for me, it was thinking about that assumption that, Jared Jones came in last year, blew the doors off of everybody, including myself. Seeing the kid pitch before in the minor leagues, did not expect him to do what he did when he came into spring training, aided by Thomas Harrington to teach him how to move his fastball, and just basically blew people away. And we're assuming, some of us as Pirates fans, that Bubba Chandler will do the same thing and will move into that Oviedo slot. Didn't have as many innings at AAA as, Jared Jones did. And you can't really assume anything with a team and presume that he is going to come in here and do the same thing.
I think that Jared Jones was an aberration last year, starting the season with the team and getting off to such a hot start. I mean, I saw him on the home opener, how electric he was. But really, my assumption has been that Bubba Chandler will make the rotation during the year. But really, I'm expecting it to be same old manipulation of service time. And yeah, I think he's going to impress people when he comes up. But I don't assume that he's going to start the season in the rotation. As exciting as that was last year with him, I just think that he's going to get some more season. He's going to get those extra innings at AAA, and they're going to value the extra year of control at the end when hopefully the window is still open. But hey, I'm open for surprises. I'd be happy to be wrong if they decided to go full win now mode and put their, fire their best bullets right from the get go.
No, and the other part with me is that, we also have to look at starting to maybe stagger these arbitrations. We're going to talk about arbitration at some point in time during this episode. And if you have Jared Jones, you have Paul Skeens, who will both be hitting arbitration at the same time, would you realistically, if you're thinking of this, business-wise, having a Bubba Chandler, if you're thinking about all these guys succeeding, obviously Paul Skeens is at the top of that, pyramid that we think is the most likely to succeed. Jared Jones, succeeded outside of what a lot of us were thinking of within that, first couple months of the season, ended up getting hurt, came back, didn't end the season great, but, obviously got that 1 year of service time. Paul Skeens is there. Bubba Chandler, if you're going to bring him up in the same vein of that, to me, Scott, it's kind of like, it's like playing with fire. We know, and like I said, we've talked about on this past couple episodes, we rely on this realistic track. We know that there's not going to be a ton of money spent. Even if it gets bumped up, it's going to be bumped up incrementally. And I just don't really see, a repeat performance of that, just because, it's going to set you up. I don't know if it's not for failure, but it's going to set you up to basically be struggling at that point in time if you're trying to keep all of these players together, to keep the cost down. If then you have three pitchers in the kind of meat of arbitration, because pitchers' arbitrations go up a lot quicker than players. We saw Brent Rooker with the Oakland Athletics. I don't know if you saw that, Scott, going back and forth with some people saying, you've kind of ruined Santander's, free agency, which he really didn't, because he's a guy that's kind of made it late in his career and he's buying out years of arbitration. But even at that, look at Brian Reynolds' contract. Brian Reynolds' contract, as compared to, some of the pitching contracts that happen to either buy out arbitration or to, extend a player. Other than Shohei and Soto, I mean, below that is some of these pitching contracts that get kind of like blow that kind of stuff out of the water. And the other part to me is that, like, I mean, you have Bubba Chandler with like, I know Jared Jones wasn't up in Indy for a ton of time, but I mean, you have like 3 appearances or something like that by Bubba, and he did do very well.
Hmm.
But I would just almost like kind of pump the brakes and like maybe give him a little bit more of a runway. And that's where I was thinking along the lines. I know we may just jump into it right now because the Pirates signed Caleb Ferguson, and then Alex Stump from MLB.com puts out there that they might stretch him into being a starter. 2 comments I saw in that was Bailey Falter, you are now a reliever, and the other one was Mitch Keller is now going to be traded, were the first 2 comments I saw
Yeah.
after, looking at that. But for me, I was looking at somebody who could be a starter because right now, like I said, you have Johan Oviedo, who you don't even know is going to be ready for opening day.
Yeah. You don't want to sacrifice the long-term future of Oviedo and what he can bring to your team by rushing him back. And he may be in this situation because he pitched too many innings. And so we don't want to, on the year back from Tommy John, don't want to overload him. So I think that Ferguson would be a fantastic addition to the bullpen. But yeah, if he ends up being stretched out to be a starter, then that buys us some time to get to Bubba Chandler. But in talking about all these arms, I think that something that we should keep in mind, and I'll give a shout out to the North Shore Nine guys because they brought this up. Arms, especially young arms, can be very fickle, and you don't know, you can't guarantee, and you really can't assume that they're going to be healthy for all the years of control. You almost, in today's world, have to build in an expectation that there's going to be a Tommy John surgery. So, in that same vein of win now, shooting your best bullets, do you maybe fast track Bubba Chandler if these other guys are healthy and you try to throw out a trio? Think about the Mets. When the Mets had that trio, Syndergaard and Matz, and those guys that they thought they were set for years with their rotation, and they just kind of fell apart. And so we maybe don't want to fall into that same kind of situation. But if you are going to be in a situation where your young arms aren't going to last or all be healthy at the same time, you got to maximize every game, every stretch that you have them all together. But Ferguson as a pickup, 1 year, $3 million, his age 28 season. I really think that this was a steal, and talent finds a way. So you just load up on the arms, on the bats, just get the talent, and they'll find a way to get on the field.
Yeah, and with Ferguson, I mean, I know it's not the sexy pickup that everybody was looking for. I mean, obviously everybody was looking for the bat that would be coming in. But as Pirates fans, as podcasters here, anybody that's been covering the team has known there is a void of left-handed arms. You have Joey Wentz and you have Bailey Falter. So at some point in time, they were going to add that arm. Caleb Ferguson, I mean, people, what are people going to do? They are going to pull up the stats for him, for this past season. And they're going to combine, the stats that he had in New York and Houston. In New York, he had pretty much the worst showing that he's had in the longest time. Like, he was a guy that was pretty much a high leverage reliever for the Dodgers
Mm-hmm.
for a couple years. So, when the Yankees picked him up, they were picking him up because they were looking for a guy to kind of close things down. And that's where we kind of talk about, relievers being fickle to a degree. But I mean, you have a guy who, when he left LA in 2023, had a 3.43 ERA. He did have the 1.442 whip, which is something that, I bring up all the time as to what can be an indicator of something going wrong. Aroldis Chapman, for his career, has had a whip that sits a little bit higher because he has a higher strikeout rate. You may have some of those blow up games, but for the most part, you are going to get a little bit of a shutdown thing because he's going to strike out a decent amount of guys. Ferguson profiles in that same way, not with the, quote unquote electric arm. But for the most part has kept his whip, his FIP, the fielder independent pitching. He kept it, under 4 for the majority of his career, including last year for the total, aside from, kind of a blow up in 2019. But he was also a starter in the minors who was brought up. We've brought this up before, of how the Milwaukee Brewers, when they need somebody to fill in, they just kind of bring guys up. And he, in turn, kind of turned into a reliever. But he's always been a starter. He didn't have bad starting numbers for his entire minors. So if you would want to stretch that out, this would be like I thought of it like a la like Seth Lugo. I mean, Lugo obviously had better numbers for a longer and extended period of time, within the major leagues. But I mean, Lugo was made back into a starter in his early 30s and is now performing well for Kansas City. So, I mean, obviously this is a shorter term deal. So this is like going to be more of like a quick hit, but the discussions about that happening, aren't a bad thing, but it's also like he's only pitched, 60 innings, 50 innings. So It's not like he's going to be stretched out for like, when people hear like, oh, he's going to be stretched out to be a starter, they hear, oh, he's going to be a starter for the entire season. He's going to pitch like 180 and 190 innings. No, this is a guy that like usually incrementally you go up by about 25% on your previous year total. So, I mean, at most, if you're pushing this guy, I mean, he's getting to 100 innings, and then you're getting into territory where you're saying, are you overworking him?
Yeah, I think the best way to use him is kind of how Luis Ortiz was used at the start of the season. Long relief in the best case scenario. Can maybe give you a spot start here and there, but you're not expecting him to go 6 innings. Somebody that can give you, 3 to 4 to start the game if you need to go that route. And then you have to weigh too. Where do you need a lefty more? Do you need another lefty in your rotation? I don't think we get to the point where Falter is expendable completely. I'm sure they could fill the hole if they had a great deal, but do you really take him out of the rotation? Do you need a second lefty, or do you want to have that lefty in the bullpen that's going to come in and for matchups, which really could have been more useful last year? So I don't know exactly if they're just telling him he has an opportunity maybe to start. We'll see how things go in spring, just to seal the deal, and then you get to Bradenton, and well, hey, you're doing so well out of the bullpen, pitching an inning at a time. Let's just focus on that. We've got other guys for the rotation. I guess time will tell how they decide to use them.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about this beforehand, Scott. It was just basically like, are they going to do like a kind of like a Scott Fleming to him? I mean, obviously Scott Fleming doesn't come with the pedigree that Caleb Ferguson does, but I mean, in the first like few months of the season, I mean, he filled in, where he needed to when there was starts, quote unquote starts that needed to happen. Would he fill in on that? Or, is is it just that there is a very long season? I mean, like we said here before, I just want to kind of punctuate this. I mean, you have Mitch Keller, Bailey Falter, Paul Skeens, Jared Jones. Mitch Keller last year made 31 starts. Bailey Falter made 28 starts. Paul Skeens made 23. Obviously, that number is going to go up because he was called up later on in the season. Jared Jones, 22. He had an injury in there, so you can't really say that it's going to bump up a ton. I mean, he went up to 121 innings, where I believe the goal would be almost like a Bubba Chandler, where Bubba Chandler was like at about 119 the year before. He would maybe at max go up to about 150. He did not make that. Martin Perez made 16 starts before he went. And then Luis Ortiz, who isn't there, made 15 starts. But there's also those other guys that I feel like we kind of like forget about in the shuffle. I know that we've talked about it, because Jake Woodford made that terrible start when I went there for the, the Hall of Fame game for the Pirates. But Marco Gonzalez, 7 starts. Quinn Priester, 6 starts. Jake Woodford, 5 starts. Carmen Majinski, mostly as an opener, 4 starts. Josh Fleming, mostly an opener, 3 starts. Domingo Herman, 2 starts. So, I mean, there's a lot of starts. I mean, Paul Skeens' number is going to go up. So it's going to pick up some of those. But there are going to be other starts that need to happen. And that's where I'm just kind of going back to is the fact that, I mean, you're asking from what Pirates fans and what I'm seeing and what I'm reading, like the tea leaves on X and Facebook and wherever it may be, is that like, oh, okay, well, Bubba will just fill that. Well, I mean, look at what happened to the Marlins a year ago.
Right.
The Marlins had at least 3 arms that were potentially expendable, maybe 4. And then they're rolling like bullpen games pretty much in like the opening series because they don't have enough arms to fill it because of the number of injuries that happened. They just had another injury to like a top pitcher who they're counting on this year.
Yeah.
So I'm not wishing any ill will, on any of these Pirates pitchers, but until the season starts to get revved up or until they start to rev up to get ready for the season, you don't know when stuff's going to, kind of pop up, different things like that. We have this perceived or assumed, I'm talking on these assumptions, you have these assumed depth within the system. Well, to me, I mean, you have Skeens, you have Keller, you have Jones, you have Falter, of guys who pitched last year for your team, who pitched starter limit, kind of like number of innings. Mm-hmm. And for Jones, that's kind of even on the lower end, for a starter. You have Johan Oviedo, who has not pitched in, didn't pitch 2024. The last time he pitched was in 2023, so he's going to, kind of come back. You have Bubba Chandler, who's never pitched in the majors. You have Thomas Harrington, who's never pitched in the majors. I mean, at some point in time, like that's where, like, I mean, when we were preparing this episode before all this stuff came out, I was just basically thinking, like, I wouldn't mind if they went out and got another, swingman / starter who could be moved out of that. And you can get that cheap. Yeah. You just got a reliever for $3 million who's a good reliever.
Now I have a suggestion to make. Somebody who's in DFA limbo, and you might know who I'm talking about. Our old friend Rowancy Contreras got DFA'd by the Reds again. You go and get him and think that maybe Strom can unlock. He's supposed to be one of the best with dealing with young pitchers. Maybe he can unlock something and get Rowancy, the Rowancy we fell in love with, to get him back. And then you really get somebody on the cheap that can fill that role, swinging between long relief and starts.
Yeah, and man, you mentioned that like the beginning of this is Rowancy just going to become the guy that just bounces from team to team and just cannot find a home? I mean, these guys aren't even really like, unfortunately at this point in time for Rowancy, aren't looking at him as, a contributor. And I'm pretty sure they're maybe talking with him, giving him, little things here and there, what they need to work on. But most of these guys, as we know, they get like a little bit of a worksheet and, go off to your regular camps and different stuff like that. So nobody even knows, what Rawanzi could do. Obviously, in lower leverage situations for the Angels last year, there's a lot of Pirates fans on there saying, why did we let go of him? Different things like that. But it's in that vein. Like, I understand that. It's like, bring him in on a minor league contract, see what happens. Before, they signed Caleb Ferguson and maybe, thought about putting him into the starting role. I had looked at Spencer Turnbull, who I had looked at last year, who, kind of came from the Tigers, but went to the Phillies this year. Didn't put up a ton of innings, but was a guy that could, perform different roles. I mentioned to you before this show, like a Ryan Yarbrough, guys that, people bring up kind of all the time. And it's not saying that, Bubba Chandler won't take that path, but you can't depend on that path. If you're saying you can't depend on Joshua Palacios to be your right fielder because that's who he's listed, if you're saying you can't depend on Jack Sawinski to be the, higher level platoon to the Randall Grichuk, then, you can't count on Bubba Chandler either. We saw, that's the thing with Pirates fans. I think we see it happen once and we think that that is the norm. And it's not because we're I don't think we're uneducated baseball fans, but I think that we I think we've talked about this before, get lost in that little bit of a bubble where once something happens and you're like, okay, well, Bubba Chandler is getting all these accolades, from all these national media people saying he could be the pitcher or the player that can contribute most to the major league team. You see, podcasts or articles being written about him, coming to spring training. And if he shows out, that he could follow that same path. I've said this before. I've said this on, previous podcasts with us, is that, I believe that, Bubba Chandler he'd find his way in the major leagues. I believe he could. I think that Thomas Harrington is ready for the major leagues because I don't know what else he can do in the minor leagues because of his pitch mix and how good he is with control. Do I think that is going to be like the best thing to put them in that position from day one and count on them? Man, I don't know. You don't know how guys are going to show up in the major leagues until they actually show up in the major leagues. And even with Jared Jones, which as well as he performed in spring training, I don't think anybody expected him to do what he was going to do.
No.
When he first came up. There was absolutely no way. In his last showing in spring training, he was getting frustrated. He was walking people. And people would basically say, oh, are they going to show him? And I went on the podcast and said, if he starts in the minors, I wouldn't be upset. If he starts in the majors, let's kind of see what happens. So, even as a guy who quote unquote dominated, I wasn't extremely bullish on, and I won't go back and say that I was and, put up stuff that changes, an alternate reality. No, I didn't know what was going to happen. And with Bubba, if you can't count on all this other stuff, you can't count on Bubba.
I think Bubba's the hot name right now, but like you said, he needs potentially more time at AAA, and that works into what I was saying about the service time manipulation to get that extra year on the back end, which hopefully is more important than necessarily this year. But Harrington is, I agree, ready to go. I think that he's got his seasoning at AAA. And I think if you are going to put anybody in that position that you feel like you can give the ball to every 5 days and count on being a contributor early in the season, I think that Harrington is, well, he's not the number one prospect in the system, and so gets some of that attention. He is somebody that we've had our eyes on for a couple of years now and anticipated and been excited about. And I do think that of the names that are out there, I think that he's more likely to break camp with the team or at least be an earlier contributor And I would not want to. I think I would want to see him be a dedicated starter instead of, like we were saying, with the being that swing man, using the Brewers approach of we need a guy. Let's just get his feet wet in the majors and start him in the bullpen. I think that somebody like him has so much upside that he needs to be in the rotation.
Yeah, and the way my brain works, the two things I'm thinking of right now is Grayson Rodriguez with the Orioles. I mean, as I was talking and as you were talking, I was just basically thinking, everybody thought Grayson Rodriguez was going to come up and stick, and he was going to do, something that Jared Jones did at last year, but he bounced up and down, and we still don't know exactly what he is because he's not proven himself kind of enough. And that's what I kind of want to avoid with Bubba. And maybe it can't be avoided. Maybe it's like you throw feet to the fire and you kind of see what happens there. But in the same breath, you have people saying, well, this is a year you can't kind of test that kind of stuff because you have to be competing.
Right. In a
So
winnable division. Yeah.
in a winnable division, as we've talked about, but kind of the other thing I think about is, I go back to like the Luis Ortiz trade. We traded Luis Ortiz, who was an invaluable member of last year's team, even though they didn't perform to the level that all of us wanted them to perform. Some of us expected them to perform. There isn't really somebody right now to fill that Luis Ortiz role. A guy who comes in and is a reliever and then can transfer to a starter. I mean, you have Michael Burrows, who has a cup of coffee in the majors. I mean, has great stuff. I'm not saying Michael Burrows isn't going to succeed, but I mean, is unproven. Like I mentioned before, Johan Oviedo, have not seen him on a mound against major league pitching since September, October of 2023. So you don't know what's going to happen with that. I mean, I feel like that, there is that money out there to spend. I mean, obviously the numbers kind of like are fluctuating at this point in time with, the projections that have been made with the arbitration people signing Caleb Ferguson, signing Andrew McCutchen. So there is some of that money to be spent. Man, I'm still going for a swingman. I honestly am, just to start the season, because, like I said, if you're not counting on certain things, I'm not counting on Johan Oviedo. I'm not counting on Bubba Chandler. I'm not counting on Mike Burrows. Caleb Ferguson, we don't know what his role is right now, but right now I'm counting him as a reliever. I'm not counting him because we already had Josh Fleming last year and we still needed Luis Ortiz to fill a role. You know what I mean? So, like, to start the season, like, I still think you need a swingman, and I don't think we found it yet.
I don't think you have to spend a lot of money to find that guy either. Maybe you trade a low-level minor leaguer for somebody's, swingman that you see some potential in, especially since it's going to be likely a shorter term fix. But you don't want to dig yourself in too big of a hole to start the season when you have those guys that are going to be coming up from AAA. If it's going to be a temporary solution, and hopefully it seems like the Pirates have a set amount that they want to spend on these bats, on these free agents. So I don't think that going out and spending money on a pitcher is going to be a zero-sum game and take away from, if you go sign a guy for $6 million, that's going to be a more steady presence in your rotation. I don't think that automatically means that you're spending $6 million fewer dollars on a bat. It's not a 1-to-1. I don't think. I think that they have a maybe a price range for a bat that they're looking to spend. But you mentioned Grichuk. That's a name that's come up in the last few days, even in the national media, and he had a really good season last year, so he's probably not going to come cheap. But if they're going to quote Mackey, shop in a different part of the store, then those are the kind of guys that they need to go get. And I think that if they're going to win a winnable division and put their best foot forward, it really is time to step up and make a signing that's going to be more of a splash than we're used to.
Yeah, and the other part is I'm thinking of is there was two names that was mentioned, recently in rumors. There was Alex Verdugo, there was Randall Grichuk. Alex Verdugo's name was attached to, half a dozen Major League Baseball teams. And kind of what happens as like you know, the crap rolls downhill type of experiment that happens in Major League Baseball is that if all of these teams are targeting Alex Verdugo and the Pirates are, assumedly, targeting Alex Verdugo. And I would see, Randall Grichuk, even though he had, in a smaller sample size, because he only had about 279 plate appearances, had a better season than Alex Verdugo. There's still name attached to things. There's still what teams are looking for. They may be looking for a defensive replacement. And the numbers don't, kind of like correspond. I looked at, Paul Goldschmidt making $12.5 million. Carlos Santana making $12 million. Max Kepler, who was injured for the majority of last season, making $10 million. So, like, there's teams that are operating on, obviously different levels than the Pirates. But, I mean, if you have that many teams, if somebody else of those teams gets Alex Verdugo, then guess where it goes to, Jesse Winker, it goes to Grichuk, it goes to whatever, who are maybe the Pirates' targets. It feels like with the Pirates, with Ben Cherington, they put their eyes on certain guys and they end up going for it. Rowdy Tellez seems to be a guy that, there was a lot of rumblings and stuff about Carlos Santana wanting to come back, different things like that. There's also been reports that, Rowdy Tellez was a guy they targeted because they saw something within him. So, but then the other part of this to me is that when's the last time, and Scott, if you can think of one of these, I would love it. Can you think of a time where there was a rumor, whether it be local or national, within Ben Cherington's tenure, where a guy was rumored and then we actually got that guy? Because I feel like there's been a lot of rumors. We were rumored about Gary Sanchez. He went to the Brewers.
Right.
I mean, there have been any rumor I can think of, the Pirates don't end up getting that guy. They end up going out and signing somebody random or somebody off the cuff somewhere else. So, like, that's the other part that I'm thinking in my head here is that, okay, they're targeting Verdugo. They're targeting Grichuk. But we also had a conversation last week about other guys from the right-handed side on my end, because I think they're still going with Jack Sawinski, and I'll push that out there again, that I feel like that I've listened to a lot of podcasts now that have mentioned Jack Sawinski's name for the first time in, I don't know, a month, 3 months. Like, I hadn't heard his name in forever. And I've even seen it post out there on Twitter. I'd kind of be okay with that. I mean, you're not going to snub your nose at a 946 OPS against right-handed hitters in 2023 is what Jack Sawinski hit. He had 26 home runs in 2023, so I don't see the Pirates looking away from that yet. If they end up bringing in somebody else and keeping him in the minors, I mean, that could happen.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I just don't see them stubbing their nose at that. But that's what I'm trying to think. Like, Scott, can you think of a player that was rumored to the Pirates that actually came to the Pirates? And we're going to have some dead air here for a second because I don't think there is one. I honestly don't think there is one.
Well, last year, I feel like they talked about Michael A. Taylor for a week and a half before it actually happened. But that could have been a case of, just formalities and putting everything together at the last minute. But, yeah, I think that when and the front office is so often tight-lipped. Rumors do not get out of the Pirates front office very often. And so I think that that's part of the frustration as a Pirates fan too. We hear all these rumors, and we're constantly checking MLBTradeRumors.com to see is there any news about the Pirates, and just nothing happens. And so that, I guess, that not hearing about it doesn't mean that there's not discussions that go on. It just means that they're better at keeping a secret. But I think, crumbs for the fan base would be nice every once in a while. Let us know you're working on something. I think I texted you in the week. I was like, I'm about ready to call in a wellness check to Ben Charrington, see if he's not like slumped over in his office at PNC Park. Like, nothing was happening. Nothing was coming out of that office. But I guess in a highly competitive area, especially when you are a lower resource team, you don't want to tip your hand, because if you did, then like with the Gary Sanchez thing, they didn't pay him that much more than the Pirates were offering, right? And so that's you feel like you're easily outbid when you have the resources the Pirates have.
Yeah. And I mean, the other part was I basically said, I think during that was like, at least arbitration news is coming up. And we did get some of that, and we've kind of touched on it, superficially, like throughout this podcast, is that, I mean, there was some arbitration stuff that was happening. I feel like that, I don't know, as this rebuild has been happening, I don't know if it's like less in touch with that type of stuff, because I mean, I realize that once you tender a guy a contract, like, he's playing for you the next season. This isn't like NFL holdout. This isn't, this guy is not going to be there. It's just basically like, how ugly do you want to make it at this point in time? I mean, obviously, luckily with David Bednar, I mean, that's one that, like, Pirates fans, I mean, they're already having protests. They're already having, stuff going on. If David Bednar was not, agreed to on this, exchange, because that's the thing is, like, you tender a guy a contract, you have discussions up until this point in time, you try to sign them to a contract, you don't agree, then you have the time until arbitration to then have more discussions to try to avoid that ugly process. So, like, I feel like everybody, I go over this every year, I believe, is like, everybody thinks this whole process is arbitration. Like, no. We tender you a contract. We want you to play for us. Because there's guys like Ben Heller, who was up for arbitration this year, who was not even in the discussion because he was DFA'd. Like, he's gone from the Pirates. So, like, that type of stuff happens. So, like, they basically said, we want you to play for us next year. Let's discuss how much money it's going to be. Here's the estimate. Here's, like, what's going on. They come up with numbers. Today they exchange numbers. With some guys, they agree to numbers. You have David Bednar, who agreed to the estimate. So it's MLB Trade Rumors is, they're giving estimates. It's not like this is what they're worth. It's what we think they're going to get.
Right.
So David Bednar was $700,000 underneath that. Bailey Falter was almost $600,000, underneath what we thought he was going to get, or what they thought he was going to get. What is it? Joey Bart was 50,000 under.
Yeah.
Colin Holderman was a little bit up. I mean, there were decisions that were made, but I feel like we came up more with the confusion with the ones that weren't made.
Yeah. Yeah. Oviedo, Dennis Santana, those guys are going to go to arbitration. And like you said, they can still talk. I believe the way it works is there's no 1-year deal at this point, right? If they sign, that has to be multi-year. But the team submits their number, the player submits their number, and then if you don't sign before then, it can get kind of nasty, because each person is going in there, each side is going in there, and if you're on the team side, it's like, well, this is all the reasons why we don't think you're worth as much as you think you are. And you have to run them down. You have to devalue them in front of the arbiters. And that's just kind of a nasty thing. But Dennis Santana, I mean, it's not the same kind of thing because he was only with the team for a couple of months. But um, you could probably make a pretty good case there. But Oviedo is somebody that you've had for a little while, and you had some high hopes for, and you hope to be a solid part of your team going forward. And that's something that I seem to remember for like Neil Walker saying that that was really where the cracks began between himself and the team was the arbitration and having to hear all of the things that they said about him in that process. So I am a little surprised that for somebody who missed the entire previous season, that they couldn't settle on a number before the deadline today with Oviedo.
Yeah, and with Oviedo, I mean, it was like, an estimated was like, I think it was like around 1.5 million. So, I mean, I kind of saw that as almost like a handshake deal. Is like you've been working through, you know, rehab at our facilities. You've been doing everything. You got paid for a contract, and that's where it comes into the business type of thing. But I mean, I said to you beforehand, is like, is Oviedo holding any ill will? And this is not like any like, I'm not breaking a news to anything. Is that there's he probably got pitched a little bit too much towards the end of the season before. Like, I don't think it's as egregious as some people, have put out there,
Yeah,
because he obviously, for a lot of those games until the end, like kind of still looked good. But yeah, probably, I mean, maybe pitched a little bit too much. So is this the kind of the fallout from that? Dennis Santana, that's one I don't really get whatsoever, because like it's a guy that really hadn't performed a lot, kind of broke out with the Pirates, and I mean, honestly, had like a Ryan Baracchi type season. And Ryan Baracchi last year was just like, what's the arbitration number? Okay,
yeah.
let's go. You
Unless they're
know,
completely lowballing him, because I guess we don't know 100% if he has a number in his mind and they're way under. But yeah, with Oviedo, you would think that yeah, I think he has a legitimate case there where it's like, hey, I took the ball when you wanted to give it to me, and that may have contributed to me missing an entire year of my career, and so I need to be compensated justly for that. But hopefully, these are the kind of things that can be smoothed over.
yeah, and I'm hoping, like I said, I want to see those numbers. Obviously, as we're recording tonight, we don't have those. The Oviedo one is a little bit more interesting to me, is like, because I mean, these numbers will come out at some point in time, because I mean, Brian Reynolds and the Pirates, were, what was it? I think it was like $500,000 apart at
Really,
one point in
yes,
time.
small amount.
Which is like a small amount. Obviously, at that point in time, Bob Nutting, the hero in the situation, steps in. You know, doesn't really wear that cape too often, and gets that smoothed over and different things like that. But I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, eventually, these numbers will come out. I'd like to see those. I'm thinking the Santana one can't be too far apart. The Oviedo one, a lot more interesting to me. But I mean, at this point in time, I mean, Scott, we've added the left-handed reliever. We need the bat at some point in time.
Hmm.
But I mean, honestly, other than a lot of the big name guys, there haven't been a ton of, these small signings, especially, since we last talked, since, Ben Sherrington said he wouldn't sign guys, didn't say he wouldn't sign guys, but was looking towards, after the holidays. I'm thinking that right now arbitration stuff has been kind of settled with guys. This has to pick up.
Yeah, they're running out of time. I mean, you're you're a month away from pitchers and catchers reporting. There's a lot of guys still on the board. This has to be the year where they can't just settle for leftovers. Now, I mean, you brought up Rowdy Telez. I don't think that was the case with him. I think that, to your point, they identified because there were still quite a few guys on the board when they signed Rowdy. And same thing, with going and getting Horwitz. There's obviously something there that they identify that they really want, and they could have just done patchwork again at first base, but they actually gave up something to go and get a guy that will be hopefully part of the team going forward for a number of years. But this is not the year to just, okay, who's around, a couple of weeks into spring training that we can just kind of plug in there. Now, internally, and we've talked about this for weeks, there are options, Palacios and Davis and, for the right-handed platoon, but they've talked about it for years. We need the financial flexibility. When it's time to spend money, the money will be there. Well, I can't think of a better time to spend the money than right now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I wish, and I feel like it's a frustrating part for a baseball fan is like, as somebody who watches football more than casually, like, what the number is that a team has to hit. As somebody who watches hockey more than casually, like, I'm not as passionate as I am about the Pirates. I mean, kind of what that number is, what you can offer players, what is going to happen. And with this, I mean, obviously the main reaction from Pirates fans is like, well, they're just going to spend no money to begin with. So, what do you expect? I mean, I wish, and that's the frustrating part is like, what is like a number that they're thinking for a right fielder or corner outfielder if they're going to pick somebody to move Brian Reynolds over to right field? What are they thinking about for, another bullpen arm, for a swing arm, a backup infielder? I mean, they've picked up some guys, I always look back to Emmanuel Valdez, who home run in the major leagues. Like, are they thinking more of him, or are they going to go out, and sign another middle infielder? It's definitely I feel like that baseball free agency is a very frustrating process. My sons watch the NBA. They have a day where everything is cut off and they know who's going wherever. I mean, they like baseball too, but the NBA is like their second. So as Pirates fans, like, it's excruciating. The off season is tough to watch, but I mean, even in the end, like I said, we're looking at these assertions. Bailey Falter should have been DFA'd in spring training, according to 95% of people that, I kind of watched. So that was an assertion. Henry Davis was going to be a god last year because of the home runs he was hitting in spring training, even though everybody now will say, don't pay attention to spring training stats. But when you haven't seen baseball in months and you see a guy hit a few home runs, people are like, oh, he's won the job. He's going to be solid this entire year.
It's easy to get excited. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like the crazy part to me is like, it's such a weird sport to follow. And that's, it's why we're like maybe masochists or, sadists, or I don't know what it is. We're something.